This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. It is Monday, June 23rd, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, the sports podcast here at Slate. Back with you yet again. I am Alex Kirshner, a contributing writer for Slate, and I also co-host the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. This week, we're talking finals. The NBA Finals, won by Oklahoma City. The Stanley Cup Final, won by Florida. And in between, a discussion of the biggest sale of a sports team ever by valuation, that of the Los Angeles Lakers at $10 billion big ones. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the biggest stories of the moment in women's athletics. Lindsay, have you recovered yet?
Oh my gosh, I have not. Championship games are always exhausting. I don't care how dramatic they are or not. There's just so many emotions. And I think we're going to talk about some. I have feelings.
And they are all valid, and we look forward to exploring them. And of course, we've got Ben Lindbergh with us as well. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer. He co-hosts Effectively Wild, a great baseball podcast. Ben, how are you?
I have also gone from Game 7 elation to post-finals deflation, although I have to say, a few shows ago, I kind of marveled at how long these finals would last. And they did last almost as long as they possibly could have. And that was weird at times with the multiple off days after each NBA game, even without travel. And there were definitely days when I was wondering why there wasn't a game. But if I had known that the series would be that good, especially the NBA series, then I would have signed up for another week or two. If anything, it ended too soon.
It did. And honestly, I hate to say it, but is it possible that we got more than we bargained for with how long the series was with what happened to Tyrese Haliburton on Sunday evening?
Save it for the segment, friends. Save it for the segment.
Needed more off days. That's the answer.
That's sports science here with Hang Up. Wouldn't have happened if there was another off day. Before we get into our business, as always, we want to say thank you to our Slate Plus members who make this show possible. If you subscribe, you help us make the show. You also get it ad-free. That's a fantastic perk. And you get bonus segments. And there is good news. We've got one of those live for Slate Plus members right now about the collapse of the Phoenix Suns, partially a basketball story, partially a sports business story, as they trade away Kevin Durant to the Houston Rockets. There's a lot of basketball on Hang Up and Listen this week, but we talked about it before, and that's because there were big basketball stories to talk about that get their tentacles well beyond the world of the round ball and really into the general sports interest space. You can hear that episode right now, as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Thunder have taken the NBA by storm. For the first time, the NBA champion resides in Oklahoma City. The storybook season is complete.
The Indiana Pacers just ran out of gas. The number 4 seed in the Eastern Conference playoffs was up a point at halftime in Game 7 of the NBA Finals against the Oklahoma City Thunder on Sunday. That was despite their best player, Tyrese Haliburton, going down in the first quarter with a devastating Achilles injury as he tried to gut out a performance through injury. The Pacers had defied gravity all throughout the playoffs. They blew out the East's number 1 seeded Cleveland Cavaliers. They won a series of ridiculous comebacks against seemingly better teams throughout the playoffs and pushed Oklahoma City, the best team in the league this year, to 7 games. But the dam finally broke with a dominant third quarter for the Thunder. And finally, at long last, there was no Pacers comeback to answer. Ben, were you able to focus on this game sort of as the sporting exhibition, not even exhibition, but the sporting display that it was? Or were you bummed the entire night because of Tyrese Haliburton's injury?
I was a bit bummed that it ended this way because it was such a Cinderella run for the Pacers, and we all had our doubts at various moments, and we had our feelings that this couldn't possibly last. They couldn't possibly keep doing what they did. And then they proved those feelings wrong over and over and over again, to the point that I and many others were rooting for them to keep making us look bad and keep surprising us. And not just our feelings, but the odds and the projections and the precedents. And they just kept clutching their way to unforgettable comebacks and just trying to be the poster team for this parody era. And really, they had, 4 playoff games at minimum that each would have been pretty legendary. And really, it was a legendary run. And I don't think that the way that it ended changes that. And this will be long remembered. But I would have preferred that if they had to lose, that they had lost at full strength or more or less at full strength, because it's going to be one of the great what ifs. What if Haliburton doesn't get hurt? Given how well he was playing to that point, the score was tied when he got hurt. And that's not to take anything away from the Thunder, who were just dominant and a deserving champion. But I just wanted to see if the Pacers could pull it out one more time.
In my opinion, be a hater. Call it a fake championship for the Thunder. No reason not to. Lindsay, fake championship for the Thunder?
Look, it's a real championship, but they left a lot to be desired. I saw a clip of Bill Simmons saying that this is the first time he might remember the finals, not for the winning team. And it really did feel like the Thunder are the winners of this series, and deservedly so, but the Pacers were the story of the series, and they were the main character of the series. And don't always agree with Bill Simmons, but I agree with him with this thing. When I think back to this entire playoffs, it's going to be, besides that dunk by Aaron Gordon, the game-winning dunk in the Clippers Nuggets now long forgotten series, which happened about 3 years ago, I think. It's going to be the Tyrese Haliburton heroics. It's going to be seeing this Indiana Pacers team gel over the course of 2 months into something that's so much bigger than it looks like it should be on paper. It's going to be seeing games where Obi Toppin steps up, seeing games where TJ McConnell steps up, Benedict Mathurin randomly, really getting to know and understand the greatness of Nembhard and Nesmith, 2 players who, I'll be honest, I confused because of their similar names a lot before this playoff run. It's going to be remembering the magic of Pascal Siakam that kind of got lost in seeing him as just like a trade asset and figure on a stat sheet. And, I still in my dreams, I see that Tyrese Haliburton shot against the New York Knicks just lingering in the air. I mean, that was an all-timer moment, watching that drop perfectly into the hoop. And the celebration, just to make it to overtime. And then again, in this final game, the biggest memory I have is it's not going to be the Thunder celebrating. And I almost feel bad for them, but they have a championship to console them in their, in their pity. But it's going to be Tyrese Haliburton slamming the floor with his fist, screaming, "No, no, no." When he obviously knew that, I don't think it's confirmed, but his Achilles, we could see the Achilles pop in the slow motion replay when his calf went down. It was so reminiscent, I'm sure we'll talk about, of what happened to Kevin Durant in the 2019 finals, the Warriors against the Raptors. But the Raptors had a few games, I feel like that series, I do remember the Raptors more than I'm going to remember the Thunder for this one. And it's not their fault. It's just what is. I just can't pretend that it's not.
Yeah. I think that 2 things. One, you don't, as you very eloquently put it, I don't think you have to win the championship to be remembered. Reggie Miller was in the stands for all of these Pacers games just about during this playoff run. Camera cutting to him all the time. Reggie Miller never won an NBA championship, and it's not like people don't remember Reggie Miller.
Right.
They remember one of the great scorers of all time. They remember what he did to the New York Knicks at the Garden. You can be remembered, and I think the Pacers are going to be. But also, goddamn, their next season blew up in this game too.
Right.
Much as happened to the Celtics with Jason Tatum when he got hurt. And that does suck. The Pacers were 3 quarters, even a half. They were up at halftime. They had been gutting it out. They were up by a point at halftime, even after the injury. You were looking at a situation where once Haliburton goes down, like this is really an all or nothing proposition. Like either this is going to be an unbelievable sports movie with a happy ending, and then yeah, your next season is cooked, but at least you have a championship, versus you're further away from a championship than you even were at the start of this playoff run. And that sucks. And I feel for Pacers fans on that ground.
Yeah, it's rare, though, for a player to change the perception of him so much. I mean, the way that Haliburton upgraded his standing in the league, where he wasn't an all-star this season. He was not an all NBA first or second team player. And by the end of these playoffs, I think he was kind of universally perceived as a top 10 player in the league. I mean, that is quite a glow up in the course of one playoff run. And he earned it just with his incredible clutchness. But it's not like Shea on the opposite side, where he just won everything you could possibly win during the regular season and the postseason. Haliburton, he didn't come out of nowhere, but in terms of just dominating the narrative the way that he did during these playoffs, that's a pretty rare thing. And he did it not by being a ball hog, but by being so selfless, by distributing the ball, by just being the linchpin for the Pacers' whole game. And I do wonder, just even though the Thunder won and were just, as I said, a very deserving champion and are set up, as we have talked about and could talk about again, to win for many more years to come, I do wonder just whether the Pacers will be copied more, whether their model for a team will be more influential than the Thunder potentially. I mean, they played so well in this series. The Thunder come in with a great defense, and the Pacers defense outplayed them really right up until the very end, when the Thunder had one of their patented third quarters where they just kind of pull away. But it's an interesting series because they were alike in a lot of respects, and neither team was very 3-point oriented, kind of going against some of the recent trends in the league. But then you have the Pacers, who are just a reversal of all of the recent team building trends, all of the heliocentric superstar super teams. And it's this era where it's going to be tough to have multiple max contracts because of just how punitive it can be, how, the CBA breaks up potential dynastic teams. That if you can do this, and easier said than done to have a team that follows that model, but can distribute the ball the way that they did and just have it be a true team effort, it's tough to replicate, but they were just kind of the emblematic team for this era.
Yeah, I should add that in addition to Haliburton slamming the floor, the other image I think I will remember the most is the footage of him in the hallway on crutches, greeting his team as they go back to the locker room after the loss, and the hug he had with TJ McConnell, and that being interspersed with the footage of the Thunder celebration. Like, I don't want to say this is why we watch, because obviously we don't watch to see injuries, but you want to see things that mean, you want to see meaning, and you want to see people care. And I think one of the cruelest things about life and sports shows us this so clearly is that the closer, the better you get to your goal, the more it means, and the more you almost lose some perspective, right? In that moment. I think if you told Pacers fans the beginning of this playoffs, you're going to get to game 7 of the NBA Finals, there would have been that's not happening. They probably would have signed up for that almost, And
you think they would have signed up for it knowing that his Achilles is going
to... No, absolutely not. I'm just on paper, they did so much more than they were expected to. They showed so much more than people thought they had. I feel like they learned a lot about themselves. They gave their fans so many huge moments, and this is a run that will be remembered forever by even a lot of casual fans, despite the outcome. But it hurts that much more. In reality, it hurts even more to get that close and to not be able to achieve it. And, that's life. That's how that works.
Yeah. The schedule I mentioned a moment ago may have helped the Pacers in some respects because they just play at such a relentless pace that any extra rest should be beneficial. May also have hurt them because they just have so much depth that it's not like any of their individual guys are as exhausted, although obviously Haliburton was dealing with this calf strain. And that's not a new thing, that sometimes a calf issue has preceded an Achilles tear. And this is just becoming kind of disturbingly common. And Lindsay mentioned Durant in 2019, but Dame and Tatum just last month, this was, I think, the 8th Achilles tear of the season. The Pacers had a few themselves. And I don't know whether this means anything. Is it that the season is too long? The players are just too big and powerful. The shoe tops are too low. I don't know how much to read into it, but it's kind of becoming the baseball pitcher's elbow of the NBA. I mean, it's literally like the Achilles heel at this point, figuratively and literally. And it's even more damaging, really, than when a pitcher goes down with a UCL tear at this point, because that's become kind of routine. I mean, not everyone comes back from it and is as good as before, but the vast majority of guys do. And an Achilles tear, that is no sure thing. Plus, just losing one guy from a basketball team, that's just going to be much more devastating than losing one pitcher from a pitching staff. So I don't know what this means, if it means anything, but it's especially devastating because watching it in the moment, and the player knows, right? And so you get that real-time reaction of, not only am I gone for the rest of this game or this series, but also a season to come. And maybe that messes with our entire plan for this franchise.
On the side of the victors here, because, hey, I guess we should talk about them for a second. Sure, fine. The Thunder are already favored to win next year. That's their early betting look. I think we've seen across sports different teams that have won their first championship, and people just assume that they're going to at least be back at the doorstep time and time again. Chicago Cubs, after they won the World Series in 2016, good example. These Oklahoma City Thunder with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook and James Harden after they made the finals more than a decade ago. So there are no guarantees, Lindsay. We all understand that. But on a scale of not very confident to quite confident that we're going to see these guys back here, where are you on the future of the champs?
I'm very high. It could be recency bias, but, I do really love a lot about this Thunder team, even though I think understandably and almost fairly, it's fair that right now we are kind of all still on that floor with Tyrese Haliburton screaming, no, 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 because it feels like we were robbed of a viewing experience. But, the camaraderie that this OKC team has, the way they are growing together, Shea's even keeled demeanor is, I find it so lovable. It's never too high, never too low, and that can make it tough to grasp onto him, but it doesn't feel like a pretense for him. It doesn't feel like he's pretending to be that way like it does when a lot of athletes try and cop that mentality. It feels baked into the core of who he is as a competitor. And I love that. It's very different, though. I do think maybe this Thunder team, maybe they have a chip on their shoulder because of how little credit they're getting, how little attention. Maybe they use that to motivate them going into next year. But the reality is there's no huge roster changes, salary cap struggles right on the horizon. They've built this team really well. They've built it through the draft and through trades. And they play a basketball style that I love to watch. So I'm excited to see this team develop. And I think they will become more compelling as they continue to age, as we continue to grow up with them, as they inevitably face more adversity, and as we see them dealing with kind of the spoils of success as well. So I'm curious to see how they respond to this victory, because as I talk about a lot, success isn't always comfortable.
Yeah, it reminds me of when we were all fawning over Rory McIlroy when he finally won the Masters, and we were almost lamenting that we couldn't really root for Justin Rose because he was really sympathetic too. And the Thunder aren't Justin Rose because they are extremely young, and that's kind of the core of their story. But if not for the Pacers, I would have been very happy to see the Thunder win. And they really did have an incredible season. Shea had an incredible season. They have the whole Shea, Jalen Williams, Jordan Pippen dynamic. Those guys just seem to be getting better. And they're so young, and they have so many high draft picks to come. And that's going to have to be the new model, too, in this era, challenging as that is to replicate and as well engineered as they were. They are as immune as it's possible to be, I think, to all the reasons why it's so difficult to build a dynastic team in the NBA now. They're so good already, and they seem to have so much more room to improve. My colleague Howard Bryant wrote at The Ringer that they didn't even really seem to know how to celebrate after they won. They weren't sure how to pop champagne. And I know people said, oh, the Nuggets, they're just getting started, or the Celtics, this is just the first of many championships. But I really do believe that even more about this Thunder team. I don't think this is close to the last that we have seen of them on this stage.
I just keep going back to that injury and the way that did it take you all a while to even get back engaged in the game as it was afterwards? And I think it's the Kevin Durant comparison has come up a lot, including by me a few minutes ago on this very podcast. But I think more emotionally, what it reminds me of was the NWSL championship game couple of years ago when it was Megan Rapinoe's last career game versus Ali Krieger's last career game. So it was Seattle Reign versus Gotham FC. And Rapinoe tore her Achilles like minutes into that game. And the way like she was the main character and then was injured, it just reminded me so much of how like Tyrese Haliburton was the main character of these playoffs. Like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander might have been the MVP, and rightly so, but he was, all of our storylines and thoughts were kind of focused on this one person. And to have him injured in that way, just like when Rapinoe was injured that way, it just throws you completely off your equilibrium. So I don't know. I don't like it.
I don't like it either. But thank you to the Pacers for making a great run. Thanks to Tyrese Haliburton for being one of the most entertaining parts of this or any other postseason. We're going to keep talking basketball after the break, but a much different sort of basketball conversation, but a very, very lucrative team sale.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, just hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
As we progress through the season, every fan knows that big wins are hard to come by and tough losses are even harder to accept. But do you know what isn't hard to accept? Discover. Believe it or not, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard that right. 99%. So make a good call for your wallet and get Discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard. The Los Angeles Lakers have been under the control of the Buss family since 1979, when Jerry Buss bought the team and set it on a course to become the glitziest and probably the most successful for a lot of the years in basketball. That run of family control is about to end. A consortium of investors led by the Dodgers owner Mark Walter has a deal in place to take control of the team at a reported record valuation of $10 billion. He's not actually paying that much out of pocket because Mark Walter already owns about a quarter of the Lakers, but still, it's a lot. It's a big number. And I think there are a few interesting things here that we can pick through. The first is that's just a lot of money, the most that a sports team has ever been valued at. And I think the Lakers are such a sure thing that it probably works out pretty well for both the team and the buyer, but I suppose we'll see. And two, something that we've talked about before on Hang Up, the character of sports ownership is changing. Teams are getting so valuable that even regular old billionaires like the Busses, hardscrabble family that they are, find it hard to buy them or to justify keeping ownership of them. And I wonder, Lindsay, if you think that might change anything about our fan experience. Start with a team like the Lakers, but I suppose this could apply to just about anybody.
I want to start by saying if I hear one more person refer to the Lakers under the bus ownership as a mom and pop shop, I will bang my head against the wall repeatedly. No offense to you, Alex, in your introduction. I understand the framing, and I don't believe you use those terms exactly, but it is just ridiculous. That being said, I think what you can say is that they were cheap in a lot of their decisions, and they were cheap not because they didn't have the money, but because they didn't have as much money and as much of a safety net as a lot of the billionaire owners who have businesses that bring in money outside of their sports team. Most people nowadays make their riches elsewhere in predatory ways and then buy sports teams as kind of like their crowning jewel as part of their portfolio. Whereas for the Busses, it was, as we said, like their main source of income. But I think I'm uncomfortable with this new world we're entering in for a lot of reasons. Private equity is going to be such a big part of it, even though that's not quite in the NBA world yet. It's getting pretty close. It's in the women's sports world already. And there's a lot of problems with private equity. But then you have these wealth funds as well that are shoehorning their way into kind of minor stakes in ownership, but as part of the entire ownership package in NBA teams. And owners are very much characters in our sports universe. Like, we talk about them. We're going to, in the bonus segment, we will talk about an owner quite a lot as far as like Matt Ishbia and the Suns. They are not the ones who are on the court or field making moves, but they facilitate everything, and less individuals to look at as the face and accountability partners for those decisions and more conglomerates. I think it's messy. Again, I don't love it.
Yeah, I think that one way this might change things, I mean, first of all, as Alex said, you have to be mega ultra rich now just to gain entry to this club that was already quite exclusive. And so the Tampa Bay Rays now are potentially in the process of being sold to this Florida developer who is barely even a billionaire. And really just seems like he can't hang with this current group of owners. His net worth is less than the sale price of the team, which, would not have been that unusual in the past. You had to go into debt. You had to have a bunch of minority owners. But if you have this class of Steve Cohen-esque mega rich owners, then there's a new hierarchy in these various leagues now where you're kind of contending against these owners who play in an even, well, it may be the same tax bracket, but you know what I mean. So yeah. I think that changes kind of, who's able to parlay their way into team ownership. And also a lot of the potential owners who are wealthy enough to do that, their single franchise is just part of a sports portfolio. And that's certainly the case for Mark Walter, who is the primary owner of the Dodgers and several other franchises. And we're seeing this with a lot of owners now, whether it's John Henry or Stan Kroenke. It's just a diversified portfolio of sports teams. It's just one of many. And I guess that's not completely new. I mean, Jerry Buss, for one, owned the Lakers and the Kings and later the Sparks and some other teams, but that's becoming more common. And I think that does change how you follow these teams because you know that you're not the priority necessarily, that these owners are weighing the financial needs for their other franchises and potentially robbing Peter to pay Paul at times. And so you're constantly thinking, did this move this other franchise that I don't actually care about, but the owner of the franchise I do care about, they had to spend a bunch of money. So does that mean that that money's not available for the team that I root for? Red Sox fans were kind of conspiracy theorizing about this just recently when they traded Rafael Devers, as we talked about last week. And at around the same time, Liverpool, which is also owned by Fenway Sports Group, John Henry's conglomerate, shells out more than £100 million on the transfer fee for Florian Wirtz. Well, how do you not think that one move might have something to do with another? So you're kind of looking across sports now to try to gauge what the impact on your sport of choice might be.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. Nothing happens in a vacuum, even across oceans in the sports world anymore. We've seen that in the NWSL with Michelle King owning multiple women's soccer teams and literally taking a coach from one NWSL team and moving it to her French team. And everyone's like, is this okay? Can we do this? It's certainly, disconcerting. I do think it's interesting. I did kind of poo-poo the idea of the mom and pop shop, but I do think it's worth noting that the Lakers were cheap, and whether or not they really had to be cheap or it was just that they felt they needed to be cheap. A lot of people seem to think that the Lakers now will be able to spend in ways that will make them even more competitive among the margins, even in a salary cap league like the NBA. A few examples via Tim Bontemps and Dave McMenamin of ESPN of the Lakers' kind of penny pitching ways in the past. I had forgotten that they applied for relief through the SBA's PPP loans during the COVID pandemic. And
Mom and pop shop. But they were public pressured to return $4.6 million to the government that they got through PPP loans. An assistant coach recently was not approved to stay at the same hotel as a player he was traveling to work out with in the off season because the room was too expensive. I mean, we're talking like hundreds of dollars here.
Yeah.
They could have afforded it. Mom and pop had it in their back pockets. But also, I've heard that they were behind on the analytics revolution as well. And, now we've seen Mark Walters do this with the Dodgers for sure. It seems like they'll really be able to beef up their staffing components. But once again, I just reject the notion that they couldn't do this before. They could have found a way to do this before and maybe had a little bit less in the bank, but they would have made it.
Yeah, because I did the math on this, hopefully correctly. So Jerry Buss bought the Lakers for $67.5 million in 1979. Now they're worth $10 billion. So that's a roughly 11.5% annualized return, or if you account for inflation, a mere 8% or so. And the S&P 500's long-term inflation-adjusted rate of return is about 6.5%. So you beat the market with basically no downside risk. And that's on top of whatever your yearly operating profits are and whatever value you derive from being a celebrity and living large and showing off your franchise. And so you can see why everyone wants to buy into team ownership. It's a great gig if you can get it. And so there was something sort of not endearing. The Lakers were widely hated, but charming in a way.
Those plucky underdogs.
Yeah. Funny, at the very least, that the Lakers were this jewel of the league and this just best known brand in basketball. And they were often so mismanaged, and they were a family business on a different order of magnitude from most family businesses that we talk about, but still, kind of the same ethos in a way, and we're often cutting corners. And now that's not going to be true. And they're probably going to be better run, and it's going to be more corporate. And Mark Walter, he's just very much behind the scenes, very much the opposite of the buses. Like, you're not going to see him on Instagram. It is not Showtime. He is pretty much anonymous somehow, even though the Dodgers have themselves attained sort of supervillain status in recent years. No one really knows anything about Walter. He doesn't do interviews very much. He wants to be behind the scenes, and that's good. It's worked out for the Dodgers. He's taken, again, a storied franchise and just turned them into an absolute juggernaut and maximized the latent value that team had. And he's done it by putting the right people in charge and being pretty hands-off, unlike Matt Ishbia, who we will talk about on our bonus episode. But I would not give good odds on Jeannie Buss remaining in charge for years, as she is supposedly going to do as the governor of this team. I'm guessing that, like Mark Cuban, she's going to get ousted soon, because you don't spend billions of dollars to buy a team that you're not going to run. And that will be the end of an era. I mean, I guess you have the Holtz, who own the Spurs, and then you have a few NFL teams that are in this bucket, but it is becoming increasingly rare. And, you know, it's amazing to me that this price, the Lakers don't even own their own arena, and they went for $10 billion. And I'm kind of fascinated by just how much higher this was even than the public estimates that were out there. And we know that those are just approximations, but Sportico had them at $8.07 billion. Forbes had them at $7.1 billion. So that's, on a percentage basis, they were way off. I mean, that's 24%, 41% off. And neither was way off on the Celtics, who sold for $6.1 billion just a few months ago. And both of those sites had the Warriors and Knicks as more valuable than the Lakers without putting either of them at $10 billion. So were they just way under on the Lakers? Are we underestimating how much those other franchises are worth? I mean, there's only one Los Angeles Lakers out there, so there's built-in scarcity, more demand than there is supply.
The Lakers have a spectacular local television deal that is looked at
just
in
like
a lot
the Dodgers.
Of sports.
Yeah,
with the same provider as the Dodgers, which I think is a key part of this. Los Angeles has not exactly one. I actually have a different one, but basically one internet provider and cable provider for most of the city. And it is Charter Communications with their Spectrum service. And they have developed great synergies in one of the largest cities in the world between their basically internet monopoly and their own cable operation, including their cable channel that they own, which is Spectrum, the sports network. And I think that is a huge part of why this is almost a no-risk thing to take control of the Lakers at $10 billion. There are a lot of headwinds facing a lot of sports franchises and sports owners, and we've talked about them. Like, you're probably thinking, wow, you're talking about a regional sports network. Aren't those supposed to be dying? And yes, but also no, not this one. Mm-hmm. To bet against the Lakers continuing to be a massive profit engine that makes tons of money is not betting against regional sports networks as much as it's betting against like the existence of the city of Los Angeles and the existence of the NBA. There's basically no world I can devise, not that I'm the world's number one sports business thinker, where there are not untold numbers of people in Los Angeles who will be happy to pay whatever they must pay, whether that is via cable fees or via, direct-to-consumer streamer, to continue to watch the Lakers. Nor will they stop going to games, nor will there be any reason to think that the Lakers cannot just keep reaching into everyone's pockets. Lindsay?
Yeah, I do feel it's necessary to say that this group led by Mark Walter, who is now going to be as we mentioned, the controlling owner of the Lakers, Magic Johnson's part of his ownership group, the way they do things. They have also owned the Los Angeles Sparks for about over 10 years now. And their ownership in the Sparks has been absolutely positively embarrassing. The lack of investment they have put into that franchise should keep them up at night. And Magic Johnson has said, oh, I'm awake now, I'm paying attention. They made some big moves in the offseason, but they are so far behind. And I don't really think there's any better example of kind of how sexism can work in sports than the way that this ownership group which does champion women. And they also have helped launch the PWHL, the women's hockey league that we've discussed, and has a really good track record on those things. But the way they have invested in the Dodgers and then left these Sparks often playing playoff games in small college arenas. And this is in the last 3 years. I hope that as they invest in the Lakers and do all these, things that we know they're going to do for their men's team, that they see the growth that has happened in the WNBA. They see how far behind they are, and they are embarrassed and get to work, because I guarantee you their money will go a lot farther in the WNBA right now. And I just think it's kind of holding in place all these conversations we're having about how much their money will help the Lakers while knowing how little they've helped the Sparks in the time they've had. It's hard for me to rectify.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's also a good reminder that the Dodgers' success is not necessarily easily replicable for the Lakers either. I mean, even though the money is there on a local level, as you just said, Alex, and even on a national level, new TV deal, the rate of growth might be slowing there, but it's still a big deal, plus the prospect of expansion fees. So like Lindsay said, these new Lakers under Walter, who is a private equity guy himself, could do a lot more on the margins, behind the scenes, player development, scouting, drafting, analytics, all the rest of it, that maybe the buses were lagging behind some other organizations. But the other thing that Walter did when he took over the Dodgers was instantly raise payroll dramatically. Of course, Frank McCourt was a disaster and an embarrassment as the Dodgers owner, and their payroll was down to something like 14th in MLB, and instantly it went up to second and then first. And the Dodgers, they haven't purely just spent their way to success in this almost unprecedented run of never missing the playoffs under Walter, winning 2 titles, but it has helped, and it's much more practical to outspend your competition in MLB, a league without a salary cap, than it is in the NBA. And even Walter's deep pockets, the second apron is probably a bit too much to outspend the competition by that margin. So you have to be smart in addition to rich to an even greater degree in the NBA than in MLB.
I just wanted to circle back. I had mentioned in my opening rant about the kind of how sovereign wealth funds were now getting into the ownership picture. And I wanted to kind of clarify what I meant for that in the Lakers sense and the sense of this sale. So in late April, TWG Global, which is one holding firm for Mark Walter has, announced a $15 billion capital raise to create a fund that they would use to invest in sports. And $10 billion of that money was invested by Mubadala Capital, which is essentially Abu Dhabi. So this is Brian Windhorst reporting this over at ESPN. So Abu Dhabi can't buy directly into the Lakers because there are rules against sovereign wealth funds doing so, but they have invested in TWG Global, which is now part of Mark Walter and his group, which then bought the Lakers. So you can see how this all gets real muddy really quickly, and I just wanted to clarify that.
Up next, a postscript on the Stanley Cup Final, where Edmonton's misery continued.
You know that one friend who somehow knows everything about money? Yeah, now imagine they live in your phone. Say hey to Experian, your big financial friend. It's the app that helps you check your FICO score, find ways to save, and basically feel like a financial genius. And guess what? It's totally free. So go on, download the Experian app. Trust me, having a BFF like this is a total game changer.
Hello, Slate listeners. I'm Felix Salmon. I host Slate Money, the podcast about all things business and finance. We talked about the taco trade recently. That was the episode called Let's Taco About It. It stands, of course, for Trump always chickens out, and my co-host Elizabeth Spires explained why she thinks this acronym bothers him so much.
You know, he's being called a coward, and he personally can't tolerate that because he's certainly gotten plenty of criticism, even during the first term, that he was inconsistent in terms of what he would promise, what he would deliver, and how many times he would reverse himself. This isn't new.
In another segment, we talked about a recent survey finding that parents are reading less to their kids, which did not go down very well with Emily Peck.
And it quotes some parents saying things like, it's so boring. They always want to read the same books. They interrupt. It's like, yeah, welcome to reading books to kids.
Join me, Elizabeth, and Emily every week on Slate Money, wherever you get your podcasts.
During any given June, the Supreme Court issues decisions at a head-spinning rate.
That's why we call this month Opinion Palooza here at Slate.
This year, a pileup of constitutional crises on the so-called shadow docket means the justices are even busier than usual.
And the outcomes could be even more chaotic.
I'm Dahlia Lithwick.
And I'm Mark Joseph Stern.
And we host Amicus, Slate's podcast about the courts, the law, and the Supreme Court. We're sharing new episodes every Saturday with deep analysis of the legal cases shaping American life.
And we're popping up with emergency episodes whenever the biggest decisions come down.
Find us by searching AMI CUS wherever you listen to podcasts.
It has been the better part of a week, but what's a week when an entire country has waited 32 years and still counting? Canada's Stanley Cup drought, talked about at some length recently on Hang Up and Listen, did indeed continue last week when the Edmonton Oilers got themselves blown out in both games 5 and 6 of the Cup final against the now dynastic back-to-back champion Florida Panthers, who have beaten them twice in a row. I am more focused on another more granular drought, though, and that is the Oilers specifically, because for 10 seasons, Edmonton has had Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl in the same lineup. That is the best player in the world in McDavid and another top 2 or at worst top 3 player in the world who just won MVP honors in Draisaitl. And for the second final in a row, Edmonton has come up empty. And I'll tell you, I might be dooming a little bit about the future of the Oilers. I'm wondering if it's time to hit the panic button just a little bit. Ben, do you think that it is? You know, McDavid will be 29 next season, which, believe it or not, suggests he is very likely already past his peak, though he will surely have many elite years left because he's a cyborg. He also just has 1 year left on his contract. Edmonton has no goaltender whatsoever. They could put you or me or any of us really out there, and things would probably be roughly the same as with the collection of netminders they put out there in the playoffs. And when McDavid was asked about signing an extension with the Oilers, he gave an answer that wasn't all that great if you're an Edmonton fan. Certainly didn't rule it out, but also didn't make it sound like it was fait accompli. So, yeah, Ben, is it dooming time for the Oilers?
Well, the Oilers haven't really had a great goalie for the duration of this run, so at least that's nothing new for them. Maybe that is what has held them back in retrospect, though goalies are just so unpredictable, especially in the playoffs, that some teams try to skimp there to get under the cap. I would be worried. I think clearly this is the time for McDavid to weigh his options and decide whether he wants to stay long term. And I suspect that he'll be giving that some serious thought over the next few weeks. But I also suspect that that assessment will result in his staying put. It just seems more likely to me that we're going to be talking pretty soon about McDavid signing a record extension to stay in Edmonton than him deciding not to sign and then the Oilers potentially trading him. I mean, it's very disappointing for him and for Oilers fans right now. It seemed like he could pull a Gretzky or a Crosby, lose his first cup, and then win the second one. Instead, he gets beaten by the Panthers again, and I guess eliminated now by the champion or eventual champion 4 years in a row. And he can sign an extension as soon as July 1st. It doesn't sound like he's in any rush to do that. And he did say that the chance to win a cup is the number one factor for him in determining where he'll sign. But ultimately, I think that he'll conclude, and probably should conclude, that he could do a lot worse than staying with the team that just was the runner-up 2 years in a row, because Draisaitl's 8-year extension doesn't even start until next season. So they still have the core in place. If they keep McDavid, they have him, they have Draisaitl, they have Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, as well as a few defensemen. McDavid is the youngest of those guys, other than defenseman Evan Bouchard. And as you noted, he will turn 29 in January. Only the Penguins, your Penguins, were older than the Oilers were this year. So they're sort of the bizarro Thunder in the sense that, they're old. But I don't know, the Oilers GM, Stan Bowman, he was the guy who helped extend the Blackhawks window when they won 3 cups in 6 years last decade. So he has shown a knack for just keeping it going. And there's enough talent, at least in the short term. I mean, yeah, there will be rumors, and the Rangers would love to get McDavid. There are other teams out there, but also think of the allure of ending the drought of Canadian Cups, doing it with this group of guys who've been together for so long, doing it, bringing the cup back to Edmonton. That's a lot that any other city and any other team would have to overcome. So I suspect that he'll stay.
I would guess that as well. But what a doomsday it would be if he did not. Lindsay, the Florida Panthers, wow. I mean, this is one of the great hockey teams that we've ever seen in the NHL, certainly in the salary cap era. And the dominance that they put on to close out this series, to me, was, kind of a nice coda to the way the series went last year. Obviously, just win, baby, just win. And they won the Stanley Cup last year as well. But, last year they almost backed into it. They were up 3-0. They lost 3 games in a row. They came back to win a close Game 7. And this year, it was a 2-2 series with 3 overtime games in the first 4, and things looked really tense. And then in the last 2 games of the series, the Panthers just blew Edmonton out of the water. And I thought it was a really impressive way to close.
It was. I mean, as a Carolina Hurricanes fan, they looked very familiar to games, those games 5 and 6, to what they did to the Hurricanes. But I think that it's kind of staggering how much they did lose a lot from their team last year and were able to really retool and get even better headed into the season. And as we've discussed how almost fluky the NHL playoffs can be, how, regular season success doesn't always breed postseason success. And yet here they are putting together back-to-back wins, and the gap seems bigger than ever between them and the teams that are chasing them. I certainly left this series disappointed by the Oilers, and it felt like they took a step backwards this season, which is a really harsh thing to say when you've made it to back-to-back Stanley Cup Finals. Some statistics from The Athletic were that they finished the playoffs with 94 goals, the Panthers did, the 4th highest total in NHL history. And they also had a plus 38 goal differential, which is also the 4th best mark ever. And the teams they're trailing are dynasties from the 1980s. So there's statistics that support that this is one of the best, at least, playoff teams that the NHL has seen in the salary cap era. And I was really moved how when they went to celebrate the Stanley Cup, they made it so that all the first timers, all the people who weren't there last season, got to touch the Stanley Cup before even the big stars did. And you don't see that. And often I think stuff like that can be overblown. The closeness of teams can be, it all looks very rosy under the guise of success and through the lens of success. And you find out years later that, the happy-go-lucky family wasn't, there were more cracks than met the eye when they were winning. But it really does seem like the Panthers have culturally built something really special. And a lot of the guys, some of them who didn't even take the ice in this series and who got to touch the Stanley Cup before the stars of the game, really talked about how much that meant to them. And I think it shows that even in the biggest moments, their most prominent players are thinking about the other people on their team and the sum of the parts. And it's cheesy. It's a little over the top symbolic, but it works on me.
Yeah, and I think you have to era adjust when you talk about dynasties in just about any sport these days, just because it's so much harder to sustain the success. But they qualify, I think, by any modern definition, given that, they were in the finals before they finally broke through, and now they've done it back-to-back times, and they were good before they really broke through in the playoffs, and had the President's Trophy curse and all the rest, and then it seemed like maybe they overreacted to their loss, and they traded Jonathan Huberdeau, and that was kind of a bold move, and they wanted to get tougher and more defensive and grittier, and sometimes that's sort of an overreaction to a loss that can backfire, but in their case, it actually does seem to have worked out exactly the way that they wanted it to. And it's a great team and a skilled team, but also just a tough team and a group of guys who just play really well together. So yeah, I don't want to talk more about the loser in this series necessarily like we kind of did in our NBA Finals segment, because they were really impressive, and they have been over the course of a few years. And they went 10-3 on the road in these playoffs, which is pretty incredible, but then won at home, which is always nice. I do want to ask one more question, though, prompted by McDavid, which is, where would you two say that hockey sits on the rings culture continuum? Because in basketball, one superstar has a huge impact. There are fewer playoff upsets. So to be a legend in that league, you have to have rings. And in baseball, only one player matters just so much, and the playoffs are really random, so it helps to have rings, but not having them doesn't disqualify you from debates about the greats. Where do you think hockey sits there when we're talking about McDavid or talking about the Oilers writ large here? I mean, how much of a stain is that on a player's record? And McDavid has many years to go, presumably, but, how much does that haunt you in hockey specifically?
I think McDavid is literally off the charts on this. Like, I almost can't even answer your question, because there is nobody in McDavid's weight class who has never won a cup.
Yeah.
There is no peer who you can point to and tell me this guy's even slightly similar to Connor McDavid and didn't win a cup. Usually several by the time his career is over. So I really hope that we don't even get to use him as a discussion point. I don't think it's ridiculous not to have one as he goes into his age 29 season. I believe Alex Ovechkin was older than that. Yeah, he was. Alex Ovechkin didn't win his until his age 32 season with the Capitals. What looks like it'll probably be his only one, though maybe he's got a year or two left to go and get a second. But, I mean, McDavid and Draisaitl together would be the two best players probably ever who did not get one, which is why it would suck. And I do think it would be lorded over them and held against them. Not so much that they wouldn't make the Hall of Fame or anything like that, because they obviously would, but that it would cause McDavid to be docked in greatest player ever discussion. Because hockey does do that. Like, Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin have had very similar careers. I think it's pretty hard to claim that on a regular season basis, for instance, one has been better than the other. But Crosby shows up higher on lists because he's won 3 cups and Ovechkin's won 1. And he's won a lot of international stuff. And so hockey definitely dabbles in rings culture.
Yeah, it's true. And I guess that's why the temptation is there to go to New York, or, like Messier did, like Gretzky did, though obviously they had won titles before that. But it's not as if no one says, or anyone says, that McDavid has not been the best player in the league, or even that he's a choker or anything. It's not like he hasn't played well in these series, or that he just hasn't shown up. It just hasn't happened for whatever reason. Sometimes a great team runs into an even greater team. So I see what you're saying, but it's also not as if, to this point he has a reputation as like it's his fault that they haven't gotten it done.
But I will say it's a compelling narrative to follow now going forward. It didn't feel like a narrative this season as much. I mean, there was some rumblings about it, of course, and we talked about it going into the finals, but it's becoming a thing, and that is compelling, to overuse that word. I will be following it more closely, and I'm always looking for ways as a casual to become more engaged in NHL storylines. And that's a pretty easy one to grasp a hold of. And while I don't think it's reflecting right now his talent level, it is a part of his legacy. And it's undoubtedly going to be a huge moment when he inevitably gets over the hump. And I think because of these two series falling short, because of, like you said, losing to the eventual champion now a few years in a row, it's going to be even that much more of a talking point. And while some might see that as a bad thing, I think for hockey overall, it's a pretty interesting thing.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the pressure is on his organization, the Oilers, to get better. Find a goalie, please. Figure out the goalie situation. And I also think they need to get younger. I read that they were the oldest team in all of the NHL this season. And as we've mentioned, it's not like our two stars are, way over the hill or anything. They're not bringing up the age. It's the age of the players around them. So we saw in OKC, the youngest champions since the 70s in the NBA, like youth matters.
Yeah, it bothers me in individual sports when you have best player never to have won X, then I just kind of feel bad for them. I feel a little less bad about it in a team sport when it's not all on that player. And we love a loser, a loser who's good, and we love when they do finally break through. So I hope that happens for him at some point, wherever it happens, though I kind of hope it happens in Edmonton.
Me too, Ben. Me too. That is all for this episode. We also have a special bonus show that is in the podcast feed right now for our Slate Plus members. It is about the collapse of the Phoenix Suns, which is sort of a basketball and sort of a sports business story as they trade away Kevin Durant to the Rockets. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer today is Ben Frisch. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelma Beatty, and thank you for listening.